All right. Well, welcome, Heather. Welcome, Matthias. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Hi, nice to see you.
Yeah, it's about 12 o'clock. We'll wait a few minutes for some other people to join us. Miles, we're going to tape this and offer it. Is that okay with you, Heather?
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, my goal today is to kind of get, hopefully people have read what you sent, and so they have a pretty general idea of what the rules are. So maybe you can just touch on those briefly. But I was wanting to know more the why behind it, and just be able to have a discussion, right? So in terms of what you guys are thinking, maybe what some other short-term vacation rental people are thinking, and me, I don't have either one, but I have thoughts, of course, too. So I'm sure everybody has thoughts, because this is a issue that's important to a lot of people. So
yeah, great. And thank you so much for the invitation. Nice to see some familiar faces on here. Hi, Matthias, hope you're doing well. And I saw Mary a moment ago. Oh, she turned her camera off. And Miles, nice to see you as always. And Rachel. I'm not going to say everybody's names. There's lots of people here. That's great. I just wanted to let you know. I'll start with
my lunch, so I'm going to not.
Okay. Understood. I put just real quickly in the chat. This was just completed earlier today. It's a web landing page that will have the information about this proposal as it develops. So right now it's got the most recent draft of the bill, which is from December now. So this is, I think I sent that all to you folks. There's the frequently asked questions that I think I've sent to you folks as a PDF as well, but now it's there available on the website. And then there's also a link to a form to submit questions. And then at the very top on the home page, there is a button to register for the next webinar. So we are going to be doing another webinar. It'll be a little bit more interactive. That's next week, Friday at 5 p.m. I know that's probably not the greatest time, but it's hard to get all these cats in the room at the same time when we're trying to present this stuff. We do recognize, but because of the level of interest in this, that we are probably going to have to hold some in-person meetings. We're just not feeling like a 400-person meeting is going to be very constructive. So we're probably going to do a series of smaller, like 30 or 40 people that we can actually really hash this through. Keith, is a great time to reach out to us. I want to be very clear that this is very much in the early stages. And it is kind of unusual for the council to put out a proposal in this way out to the public before it's been even introduced. So I want to be very clear that this is not something that has been introduced to the council yet. It is just a proposal. We are just looking for feedback. We appreciate the feedback. And once we feel like it's in a pretty good format based on all of the feedback, then we'll introduce it. It's going to have a minimum of 6 public hearings. So because this is an amendment to the zoning code, it's going to have to go to both planning commissions. So it'll be introduced in committee, referred to the planning commissions. That's 2 hearings there. Come back to committee. That's another hearing. So 4 hearings. And then a minimum of 2 in council as well. So there's lots of opportunity for public input on this, and I want to make sure that that's very clear to everyone from the get-go. So just a couple of things. That the primary question that Keith had and many others have is why are we doing this? And there's a number of reasons. First and foremost, the mayor and I just spoke yesterday about some joint priorities, policy priorities that we as the council and the administration share. And the top of both of our lists is the housing issue. And the housing issue is not one that we solve by just building alone. I think the mayor and I are in agreement that there's the building aspect, building more units, keeping more units available for housing, so preventing them from slipping out into the transient accommodation market or to other markets or to other activities. And then finally, making sure that people can stay in their homes. That looks like, emergency rental assistance, things like that. So we're going to be tackling all 3 of these angles, making it easier to build things, making sure that once we create inventory, it stays in the long-term housing, affordable range, and then making sure that once people are in homes, they can stay in those homes, even in the event of some sort of emergency. So that is part of it. And there is lots of data nationwide to indicate that a transient accommodation market that is uncontrolled results in lower availability of housing, as well as an overall increase in rental rates. So it's not just an issue of impacting the inventory that's available, but it also impacts the costs of that inventory to have an unregulated transient accommodation rental market. The other thing that this bill is about is making sure that everyone who is operating transient accommodation is doing so legally, safely, and in accordance with standards of operation that prevent them from being a nuisance to the neighborhood. I mean, that's a lot of the calls that we get, is about how the standards of operations are not being enforced. And the problem there is actually what we've established is the standards of operation. They are somewhat nebulous and unenforceable. I'll give you an example. One of the current standards of operations for a short-term vacation rental is that it not impact the character of the neighborhood. Well, who gets to define the character of the neighborhood? How do you determine if you're in violation of the character of the neighborhood? And so we've tried to amend the standards such that they are more concrete, quantitative, and defensible. So an example is how many people can be at an event at a home. You know, how many guests can the guest have over, so that you don't have these big ragers going on at STVRs. That's something we can measure and we can enforce. The other thing about that is that the penalty system with respect to transient accommodations at this point is pretty minimal. Like if you're in violation of the standards and it can be proven, you get a $500 fine and a letter that says, please stop doing it. These are the standards, and that's kind of it. So we've tried to make the enforcement standards a little bit more compelling, I guess, if you will. If you're renting something for $2,000 a night, a $500 fine is not much of a impetus to get yourself on the right path of how to operate your transient accommodations. We also just don't know how many are out there, the condition they're in. There is a public health and safety concern about people renting unpermitted structures or unsafe structures. And so, you know, the primary thing is we want everyone to register. And that way we can just ensure that all operations are happening safely, both from a public health standpoint as well as environmental health standpoint. You know, we don't want to have people renting out transient accommodation where it's an outhouse in the backyard that drains into the stream. So there's many things to consider with that. And then finally, we are anticipating an agreement between the hosting platforms, so your Airbnb, your VRBO, that at some point they will require, we'll agree that they will require a transient accommodation number to be put on all of their advertising. And so they've been really great partners with the County of Kauai in terms of ensuring that everybody was following the transient accommodation rules, and they put their TAR numbers on their advertising. So that's another reason we want everybody to register, so that we're also working with our partners in the advertising space to make sure that all of the accommodations that are being made available are legal and are safe and meeting the standards that we would like to see applied to transient accommodations. So that's a little bit about the background. You know, 108 was created to address the unhosted rentals, and there was always an intention to come back and address the hosted rentals and bring them into the fold, and that's in part what we're doing here now that we've seen how 108 has worked over the past couple of years.
That's a lot of good reasons. So one quick question, Heather. One of the other things that I did watch the YouTube video on the first presentation. There was a lot of referring to the state law that you guys were trying to match. Can you tell me what that state law is? I mean, it seems like we're going above and beyond it, but maybe we're not. I just don't know.
Yeah, so the state law that we're trying to align with actually has to do with the time frame, and that's the state law that has to do with the transient accommodation tax. Both the state law and this is HRS 237D, as well as our own property tax law, Chapter 19 of the Hawaii County Code, consider short-term accommodations to be 180 days or less. Everything else is, more than 180 days is considered a long-term rental. And so if you are renting anything for less than 180 days, you are subject to the transient accommodation tax at the state level. At the county level, all of the implications in terms of what your tax rate would be is based on that 180 days threshold. Kauai and Maui also use 180 days as their threshold. City and County of Honolulu and us are the outliers. Ours was 30 days under transient accommodations. City and County of Honolulu, of course, just recently passed that bill, which sets it at 90 days. So that's what we're trying to align is the state HRS with TAT and the Hawaii Property Tax Code.
Okay. Good. I must say that the frequently asked question thing you put out was very helpful. Thank you for doing that. And is there anything else you wanted to add before I ask Matthias, kind of from a current short-term vacation rental provider, what he sees the changes being from what he's got now versus what the new law would possibly change for him? Maybe nothing, I'm not honestly sure. But did you have anything else you wanted to add before I ask Matthias that?
Yeah, so I want to make it clear that we have I hope everybody has reviewed the frequently asked questions, because when I've spoken with people that have concerns about the bill, it's often because they don't understand some of the language, and once I explain what we're trying to do, they're more comfortable with it. So lesson learned for me, I probably should have put a FAQ type document out right away with the original proposal, so that bills are hard to read. I'm used to reading them all of the time, legalese language, and I think that caused a little bit of confusion, but hopefully everybody's had a chance to review these FAQs. We recognize that the approach that City and County of Honolulu took, which was just to ban transient accommodations anywhere other than resort zones, was not going to work in Hawaii County. We have too many folks that are able to live here and make ends meet because they are able to rent out a portion of their property. And we also have many areas of the county that are underserved by resort accommodations, and nobody wants to build a resort there anyway. So, understanding that the market is different and that it is such an important part of some of the income streams for our local residents, we took a different approach, which I feel is more balanced and fair. I mean, we're never going to please everybody, but we have tried to be reasonable and fair about it. That said, we do have a few additional amendments probably coming out next week around just some more clarifying language and bringing a little bit of simplicity to the bill, but it is possible that some of the questions and concerns that folks may have been addressed. So I'm going to pull that up so I have that here for Q&A later. But we are, what I'm trying to reflect is we are being very responsive to the feedback we're getting when there's need for clarity or things that we have not taken into account. And I won't name names, but there was an attorney in the area who was great. He looked at our bill and told us everything that he would sue us for. And we have since remedied all of those components of the bill. And so, again, I'm just trying to reflect that we really, really appreciate the feedback and impact input from folks that have expertise. So thanks.
Okay, so before I call Matthias, can you clarify one thing for me that I guess I'm not real clear on? Is you had talked about different vacation zones or something where it'll be easier to get these types of TAR rentals done. Do you have any in mind at this point, or?
Yeah, so the vacation, what we're calling them is vacation nodes, and to be clear, this would be something distinct from a resort node. A resort node you can build a hotel in. A vacation node is really just to create an area where people that are operating transient accommodations would not have to get a non-conforming use permit. in addition, the way the language is worded in the bill right now, so it would be a permitted area for somebody to start a new unhosted rental, which is something we don't have right now outside of the resort zones. You can only start a new unhosted rental in the resort zones. A vacation node would be another area where you could start an unhosted vacation rental. Examples would be like Puaco, potentially portions of Volcano Village, you know, places where we have a destination, if you will, but there's no resort accommodation. So it makes sense to provide some opportunity for that in that area. The way that the bill is written right now, we took out the part where we were identifying any to begin with. And so any resort nodes will have to go through the process. And the process is very much like the same process you would go through for a general plan amendment. So it's kind of like it's a fairly complex process, and it's intended to be one that includes a lot of public input.
Right. So there's not a plan in place with specific areas yet. That's to be determined type thing.
That's correct. I think our decision has been, and when I say I'm talking about the planning department, Council Member Kirkowitz and I. This is the team that's been developing the bill. Our approach at this point is to just create the process for these nodes to be created, and then as there's potential interest in creating some of these nodes, we would have them go through this process. But at this point in time, there's no process, and the vacation nodes as a concept doesn't exist in the code.
All right. Great.
Can I ask
Thank
a
you.
question before we go on to, this is just for clarification.
Yeah, go ahead, Marcia.
So one of the things I couldn't tell from reading through the bill is what the circumstances are under which a non-conforming use would occur. And based on Heather's last comment, is it because it's operating outside one of the identified districts, the V, CGCN, CV, and CDH? Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. So at this point in time, you know, the unhosted rentals are required to get a non-conforming use certificate when they're in ag land or residential, in one of the non-conforming zones. What we've added to this is if you are a primary resident, you can start a transient accommodation in your property at any time, and you're in your primary residence in an attached or a detached bedroom. But we are requiring a non-conforming use for a guest house or an ohana. And that is because ohanas and guest houses are permitted for a different use. And so using it as a commercial activity is a non-conforming use of those two types of dwellings, although we are permitting it. You just need this non-conforming use. Similarly, folks that are doing a unhosted rental will have to go through the same non-conforming use when they're not in the zoning areas that allow it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Marcia. Okay, so I guess at this point, I mean, I'm assuming everybody's read something about this, and so we're not just floating blind here, because if Heather had to go through the whole bill, we would use up our hour plus. So I just wanted to just kind of get some general feedback, and I asked Matthias to join us because maybe just Matthias explain what your short-term vacation rental is, how it's used, or I guess the rules under Bill 108, and how you've had to, if you had to do anything with that, and how it might change under the new bill, just to get an idea from a perspective of a short-term vacation rental owner.
Thanks, Keith. I appreciate it. And Heather, I really want to commend you guys for excellent outreach. And, you know, I think Bill 108 was a small disaster, and you guys are really taking those lessons learned, and that's fantastic. I am a short-term vacation rental. I have one unit. I'm not a realtor, I'm not a professional. I do have almost all of my rentals are the affordable housing rentals, Section 8 stuff, even. And I do have this one from a house that I owned a long ago. And the non-conforming, I have a non-conforming use certificate from the original bill. And that language is very similar to the current hosted bill. people who are not used to jumping through those hoops, it's an additional regulatory burden. But as Heather pointed out, there needs to be a balance out there. And I think it's a good step to keep things, in balance. That being said, I think the other side of the equation of regulation is really keeping our middle class and entrepreneurs, able to keep them going, people who have a side hustle. And Airbnb is probably one of the most classic side hustles out there that you can do with your property. And with housing expenses, what it is these days, a lot of people make up their mortgages, the difference in it by doing this. And so I think it's important to balance both sides. One of the things that I wanted to point out in this bill that Heather, I don't think was really outlined, is currently you can rent out your ohana or your ag dwelling if you have an ag dwelling on agricultural property. And once this bill is passed, you have to show that you were in existence before November of 2022. So you could not build an ohana in your residential district, even if you lived on the property and hosted in the future, because that's considered, as she pointed out, a non-conforming use. And stop me anytime, Heather, jump in if I'm saying something incorrect.
Yeah, no, actually that is incorrect.
Okay.
So the requirement to have been in operation by November is for folks that are wanting to get a hosted rental registration where they have an on-site operator, and they have to have shown that they had that on-site, so a caretaker, if you will. If it's your personal property, at any time you can go ahead and build an ohana and use it as a transient accommodation, as long as you get the non-conforming use for that. So that if it's your primary residence and it's your primary property, then that's allowable at any time.
Okay, so even going forward, you can do that.
Yes, if it's your if it's your primary residence.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the tap that we're turning off is for the speculative second properties that people own. They are not going to be permitted to do that moving forward. It's only on your personal property.
So if you had two rentals and you had one of your tenants manage the property, that's what would become, you'd have to show that before the November.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Good.
And then, the flip side of this, Matthias, and maybe I'm sorry to interject in your portion here, but one of the things that I didn't mention is that the planning department and I are genuinely interested in making accessory dwelling units more easy to build, but we've got to turn off the tap before we make it easier, because if we make it easier to build them and then they just get flipped into transient accommodations, we have not addressed the housing market issue. There's a lot of great things that Kauai has been able to do on second dwellings, additional dwellings, providing funding for sewer hookups and things like that, or cesspool conversions. We'd love to copy that, but we just don't want to start that if they're all just going to be flipped into transient accommodations.
Yeah, and that was actually in my notes, is I thought that was the impetus behind that. I didn't realize you were still going to allow it going forward. And then also, can you expand on this, the ag dwelling and home, whether you're a home because of the state law? I noticed it wasn't in the FAQ or in the original webinar. You kind of outlined that, but maybe explain to folks that.
Yeah, that is one of the things that I do get a lot of questions about, and I thought it was in the FAQ, but I'll double check and put it in there if it wasn't. In particular on agricultural land, since that 1976 law, the one that is going to court and all of that, on ag land, if you were to build an additional dwelling, it became a second or an additional farm dwelling. As part of that permitting process, there is a recorded agreement when the permit is issued that that additional farm dwelling will serve an agricultural purpose. And so it is our interpretation of that law that it is already illegal actually to operate a TAR out of an additional farm dwelling because there is that recorded agreement associated with it when it gets permitted. Similarly, prior to that, there was something called the second dwelling, which is kind of the equivalent, but it still had that recorded agreement associated with it. And so our interpretation is that that is already illegal.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to point that out. I didn't see it in the fact, but that would be a good one because I know that's a lot of them. And one of the ones that I can just put it out to everybody here is there's a the two things behind short-term vacation rentals are their subtraction from the possible rental pool. And then also changing the character of a neighborhood by having parties or people who, disrespect the neighbors, noise, etc. And, but on the other side, so there's the two noise violations. If you get, according to this law, as it's proposed, you get two noise violations in 12 months. You get a 2-year suspension. And, just from my perspective, I've never had a noise violation or anything like that, but I know that can be weaponized. I know there was a person in my neighborhood that people were going against because they had a short-term vacation rental and they were pretty lousy, but rules like this can be weaponized unfairly, because if you have two random people who screw you, that's a pretty tough sentence. So something to consider, because I guess if they have an on-site operator, they can try and stop it. But that might be weaponized by neighbors.
Yeah, and just let me be clear that the two violations within the certain time period is it becomes there's the potential for the director. So it says the director may suspend the registration if there are no efforts to resolve them. And so, part of it, it's not that you just get dinged twice, and regardless of whether those dings are factual or not, there has to be an actual violation, and those violations are not being remedied by the owner. If that is perceived to be happening, then this is just a tool in the director's tool belt to say, well, okay, you can't have your registration until you fix these things. So it's just another tool for compliance. But I see your concern, but I feel like we've buffered it a little bit, that this is not an automatic thing, and it does have to be that there doesn't seem to be any action being taken to resolve the violations.
Good. And then my last question is the vacation note. It looks like how it's written, one person could become a vacation node. So you could just have arbitrarily a house, wherever it is, request as a vacation node. And it's not really clear. I mean, there's priority listings if there's amenities nearby and such, but is that correct?
Yeah, it is written that way, and that is one of the things that we're working on to clear up. I mean, it's written that way for a general plan amendment too, right? Is that anybody can initiate one, but it's got to go through all that public hearing process and planning commissions and all of that stuff. And so the likelihood that you're one owner and you notify everybody within 300 feet that you're going to do this, and they all come in and say, yeah, okay, sure, is probably small, but that is something that we're looking at. So if you have recommendations, certainly willing to take those into consideration, because it does seem inappropriate that there would be this kind of spot creation of vacation notes.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because that's how it seemed like it was written. Okay. That's all the questions I have. I mean, I appreciate you coming forward and helping everybody understand. And I see some real estate professionals here who probably know a lot more than me about this.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Matthias. All right, so before I guess I open it up to questions, I did have, so I just tell you, Heather, my immediate reaction was a negative one because I always want, property owner rights to be allowed, right? So, it's just like, this is my property. I should hopefully be able to do, what I want within reason, right? But do we have any data showing that, one of the things that is frequently asked questions was, Hawaii County has seen a significant problem with available housing, which I understand, but it says reduce speculation by outside investors on our island. Do we have any data showing that we have people coming in buying places and taking houses out of the rental market?
There is some data that is available that could be interpreted that way, and Mary probably could speak more to that with her expertise. But it's most of the data that I've compiled comes from public health research that has to do with municipalities similar to ours. So that there's a Harvard School of Public Health study that looked at several municipalities that are sort of vacation type destinations and looked at the impacts on inventory as well as the overall impacts of the real transient accommodation market on overall rents, and there's a correlation between the quantity of TARs and the a percentage increase in overall rental rates for long-term rentals.
Okay, good. And then the only other comment I have before I open up was just that I'm glad you talked about looking at the building side of the problem, because I think one of the reasons why we have a shortage is because of the building code being very onerous, and also the challenge of how long it takes to get a permit. So I think that's part of the problem when there might be a lower supply as well. So anyway, that being said, does anybody have questions for Heather while we have her, or comments on things that could be helpful?
And Keith, before you move on, and for everybody else too, this landing page, so I put that link in the chat again that has the landing page. Some of that background research I'm going to curate and put it as another page on the site when I have some time to do that, so that everything's very transparent about where this data is coming from. In addition, I'll put together a page that tracks the various versions of the bill so that it's really obvious like what has been modified between the various versions. So hopefully will help keep everybody on the same page with the process.
Okay, great. Thanks, Heather. Kopono, I see you got your hand up. You got a question?
I do. I actually have many, but I think I'm only going to ask the top two for now, just to not take up everybody's time. But I do want to start off by thanking Councilmember Kimball on allowing us to have this kind of input well ahead of this bill potentially being introduced or brought up to the County Council at committee. My first question regarding the vacation nodes, I'm sure there's an easy answer for this, but I was curious to know why the vacation nodes would only be applicable to state land used urban areas.
Yeah, that is another thing that we're looking at. So just to give you a little background too about some of the language in this piece is I don't like to create anything from scratch. I pull things from all sorts of other places, and part of the initial background research on this particular bill, including looking at every other county's transient accommodation rental code. And so the vacation node concept actually came from Maui's transient accommodation bill, where they allow for expansion of resort nodes. The criteria that they have are very similar, although we've modified that a little bit, and the process is very similar in terms of including the public process. So we started looking at that land use urban as a starting point, and just kind of see if that was going to make sense. But I think I can say we're revisiting that. there's a whole nother piece of that about whether or not some of the places on this island are properly zoned to begin with. I think we have a lot of areas that actually should be transitioned to something maybe more like rural, which is different than ag. And so that's something we might look at as well. So not a concrete answer on that one. We're still working on that. So.
No, that's fine, because my second question, which I think might have an even more crumbly, not concrete answer, just curious to know, from your standpoint, what are the defining differences between residential use of a property versus commercial use of a property when it comes to rental?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's runs along the lines of whether or not you are providing a primary home to someone, or you are, providing this sort of service. So that's how I make the distinction. I hope that's clear. And one of the amendments that we've made that'll be coming out in the next version of the bill is that we've actually defined a transient, which I think is important when you're talking about transient accommodations. And so a transient is someone where this is not their primary home. And so that's where I think the distinction is to me.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? I'm sure people have them, or comments.
Since Heather mentioned that I might have some information regarding, I don't have the report right in front of me, but I can tell you that relying on the escrow companies, you've got it, Heather. Okay.
Yeah.
So that shows you that 1 in 5 homes that was purchased in the past, in the year of 2022, was purchased by someone who did not have a Hawaii zip code. And that 4 out of 5 homes was purchased by someone who lives and pays taxes in the state of Hawaii. So it is not the outsider that is buying up our real estate. That's really important for people to appreciate. The other aspect is that, so we can say, well, what right do they have to, charge whatever rent they want to charge? Well, that's America. That's the free market that we all, that people live and die to defend for us, that we have a free market economy. If we did not have people buy property that they then rented out, we would have a much, much more serious housing crisis than we currently have. The biggest, I agree that it's a difficult situation to build ourselves out of, but we have got to make a better effort at it. And this is not just Hilo, or Hawaii Island or the state of Hawaii. This is happening all across the United States. There are housing issues in many other communities that are worse than ours. And it's because we have failed to build the sufficient inventory for, to keep up with the growth of our populations. And many of those, there's lots of different political reasons that can be given for why that happens, but a lot of it's regulations that push back. It's regulations that are adopted because they're recommended by an umbrella organization, but then they're inappropriate for the locale. I mean, the fact that Hawaii Island is now governed by the energy code that we're governed by is one of the most ridiculous things we ever allowed to have happen. The idea that you can have a home at 1,000-foot level, no air conditioning, and you've got to have double pane windows and insulation. I'm sorry, but I don't know any nice words to describe that. I can't say anything ladylike about it. I'll end there because I have some very strong feelings about this that'll be better heard in a public hearing. So, thanks.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
And for anyone who was wondering, I did drop a link to Title Guarantee, who does keep track of these buyer statistics on their website quarterly, if anyone was interested to take a look there. And as to Mary's point, it's about 1 in every 5 homes is sold to someone from outside of Hawaii. When you look at the foreign market, they only make up about 2 to 3% of the real estate purchasers year over year in the county and in the state. And to be clear, you can look at them specifically by county. We've been focusing on Hawaii County's numbers, of course, so you might find other differing figures for the other counties that are all located there.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
But just to add on to what Kapono was saying, they're not that different from our county. Throughout the state, the local residents are the top buyers.
Thanks, Nui. Joy.
Excuse me, just got one, just a comment here. Does that include, I mean, these stats that Mary just put out are surprising to me. But does that include outside people going through local residents here to buy land?
Someone may do that, but that's a lot of hoops to jump through for, you know, I don't know why. I would want to understand why someone would do that. There's no reason. That would be a case of probably money laundering that has a bigger issue than transient vacation.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, I mean, the other question that pops up with those statistics would also be is the question of if 1/5 of the people are outside Hawaii, are they moving to Hawaii? Right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're just turning around and renting it, right? They might be moving here. So anyway, Joy, you had your hand up. Question.
Yes. Hi, Heather. I'm Joy Dillon. I don't know you personally, but I am the co-chair of the Hawaii Island Realtors Government Affairs Committee along with Kapono. And I just wanted to clarify your answer to Kapono, his second question, the residential versus commercial, because you ended up your answer by saying that residential would mean it was your primary residence. Whereas it seems like a lot of the bill gives a lot of leeway to people that are renting out their primary residence. So could you clarify that again?
So the way I interpreted the question was, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the question was, what is the difference between somebody providing a long-term rental on a residential parcel versus a transient accommodations, and why would that be viewed as commercial? And I probably should use the correct terminology to say that if you are providing a residence for someone that is legally, for legal purposes, their home, I think that that is a different scenario than a commercial activity, which is a vacation rental. And that's how I would distinguish those two. So that was, is that clear? That was the question that I thought I was being asked. If I misunderstood the question, then
well, I guess I'm just kind of confused because there's a lot of outs for people that, like, if it's your primary residence, then you can start doing this at any time. And then it's mentioned several times, like, if it's your primary residence. So if it's your primary residence, then that would be residential. Then it all of a sudden it turns into commercial if you become a tar.
No. So and the bill intentionally, I mean, speaking to Keith's statement about the importance of personal property rights when it's your primary residence, that's in response to the understanding that, as Matthias mentioned, this is kind of the side business for a lot of people to rent out a guest house or to rent out an extra bedroom or things like that. Whereas it's not intended to indicate that this is a commercial now activity happening on residential property. Are you maybe referring to like the impact on property taxes and how that piece of it in terms of the activity?
That wasn't, no, there is that issue, but that wasn't what I was referring to. It was more about the definitions. I don't know that it matters a whole lot, but I was just a little confused. So
Joy, if I can jump into, I think for the purpose of me and my understanding and asking the question, I think it got clarified once Heather had mentioned that there's that definition of transient. And so when the transient part comes into play, then it's commercial versus, say, a parent who has a college student who goes off to college. When they come back, maybe they're charging their kid some money to help pay for the utilities or whatnot. I don't think, and Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think their child would necessarily be considered a transient in that case.
Yeah, no, not at all. And you know, some of there's in the bill right now, there's the whole list of exceptions to what is a transient. And we actually pulled that all out and then kind of stuck it into this definition of what a transient is. So things like students that are enrolled in university here, or farm workers where the housing is provided as part of their compensation, or traveling nurses and doctors that are here employed on a temporary basis at one of our medical facilities. Like those folks aren't transients per se, and the scenario that you gave is you know, similar. They just because they're contributing monetarily, if it's a family member, then that's not a transient by definition. I was trying to, my Microsoft Word is not working, which has never happened to me before. I can't open my own bill. I know, otherwise I would cut and paste the definition of transient that we've created for you, but it's actually in the HRS, so you can just look for it there.
Great, thank you. Matthias, you got your hand up, I see.
Yeah, two items, one from earlier, kind of, maybe Kapono or Mary, there used to be some great statistics at, well, I think it was on Zillow or Redfins or one of the, you know, because I'm not a realtor, easily accessible sites where they had graphs of rental rates and sales prices and sales volumes. And right after the 108 bill passed, I remember in Kona, there was a pretty significant bump of condominiums being sold, which depressed the price. But inside of a year, it was pretty interesting. Inside of 1 year, that one time kind of anomaly of where people in the mainland dumped their condos, rents continued to climb right back up, and condo prices, same thing, you know, real estate prices. So it never really had any significant change to the rental or real estate market on the west side, you know, that North Kona district. And I don't know if that's something you guys can draw up, but I always thought of that as pretty interesting as a direct data set from our own first time in our short-term vacation rentals.
Well, most of the people that I know that sold their properties didn't sell them because they were illegal and couldn't qualify or whatever. They sold them out of disgust. They didn't want to own property in a place that disrespected private property rights. That was the predominant reason that people sold their property, and they took their money and went somewhere else. And that's something that we need to take into consideration. There's the number of people that are owner occupants that feel that, and you know, it's my home. If I want to rent out a bedroom, if I want to, then that's up to me. And why does the County of Hawaii get to change my real property tax allowance? And who are they to stick their nose in my business? One of the things that attracts people to Hawaii Island is that we have a little bit of the wild, wild west. And that's why people come here. They're tired of the rush of traffic in Honolulu. They're tired of being stuck in the saddle between Kahului and Lahaina. The number of people that have moved here from Kauai that are able to own a home here and work at the hotels in Waikoloa, because even if they're on the road for an hour and a half, they were on the road for an hour and a half in Kapa'a, and they never left Kapa'a.
Yeah.
You know, Hawaii County has been a very attractive and welcoming place to a lot of people. And all of a sudden, we're starting to paint ourselves as not being so generous, we've lost a bit of our aloha with all of this stuff about the beach. When you look at the small number of complaints that have been filed, to me, that's like insignificant. It's almost like none. But when you look at the number of vacation rentals, and it's really a shame that we're having to take all this legislative time, all this community time for a few rotten apples in the barrel. I say we all get together and get the damn barrel out of town and move on with our lives and stop, let's change the energy code. Let's spend the energy getting the price of materials down, the cost of housing down. But we're not, we're legislating ourselves into a hole. So.
Here.
If I may, just a couple of responses. So first, to clarify that with respect to the property tax, there is that language in the bill around property taxes. And I wanted to highlight that it is duplicated out of Chapter 19. So the reason that we put it in there was not, it's not actually creating those rules around property tax. That's already in place. We just wanted to make sure that people that, or maybe they're looking at our transient accommodations law because they're trying to decide whether or not to do it. They may not even refer to Chapter 19, so they may not even be aware of the potential impacts as from the tax angle. So that's why it's included in the bill. I wanted to be very clear that the bill is just repeating that from law that is already in place. And then Mary, yeah, you're absolutely right about permitting and some of the codes that we are currently under, and that was part of the conversation that I had with Mitch the other day, and I think it's a joint priority for both the council and the administration to take a second look at some of that. As you know, I am intimately familiar with the design and build process and what it does actually take to get some of this stuff done. And I joke to people that if you ever there's a hurricane coming and you want a safe place to be, come to my house because it is totally overbuilt. Built under the most recent code, and it's never going to blow away or have any damage, but it's probably way overbuilt by a lot of standards, and that impacted the cost. So, before, when I was talking about the whole housing spectrum of ways that we need to address the housing issue, making it more cost effective to build and easier to build is also part of that picture. It's not the only thing that will solve the problem, but it's part of the picture. So, we are working on that too.
So if I may, I haven't read the whole thing. And this is Denise Nakanishi, not just Denise. I am Denise Nakanishi. So, I was meeting last night with my contractor because, we build houses, and the house that we started most recently took us 9 months to get the permit. We all know that's a messed up. He said in 2003, it took 2 weeks. And, the things, to Mary's point, is there's so many things that we shouldn't have in our building code. I mean, that house from 1938 is still on those pier blocks that it was put on in 1938. The last one I built cost me 3 times as much to build as a slab house. And it's probably way better for flood runoff, to have a post and pier home than a slab home, because you're going to get water intrusion. So anyway, that's and then I'm glad you explained about the nurses. And the other thing that always, especially in East Hawaii, the properties that are in vacation rentals, except for these that are renting tents and those kind of peculiar, that's a different kind of adventure, but they're trophy properties. If you take them out of the vacation rental pool, they're not going to become available to a local person because they're not going to be able to afford it. So anyway, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your input. And again, if I can just share a little bit, the Department of Public Works and the administration, continue to work on the implementation of EPIC and addressing the staffing problems which we have in DPW, which is a large part of the delay with respect to permitting. So we have a position as far as plan reviewers where I think we're supposed to have 6 people and we have 1. There's no doubt that has an impact on the county's ability to process things, but there are other issues associated with that are more policy related in nature, and so we're looking at some different things, and it's premature to go into any of the details, but you guys can expect some things in this area to be coming in the near future.
Just a comment on what Mary alluded to, as I've had over the last 8 months, not a year, not 6 months, 8 months, 3 fairly good friends who are professionals that have been here for 25, 30 years leave.
Mhm.
Because they felt that they had no control over the first thing being their homes and their sites. And the second point was I've had some college friends, military friends from the United States that are thinking about coming here and buying and settling down. They pulled back. So, you know, those are just my comments.
Thanks, Kurt. Okay, so we probably have time for about one more question, and Grace, you got your hand up, so go ahead.
Thank you. So I pulled the most current draft bill from the website, the landing page. I just want to make sure, and thank you for that, because I did meet with you, I believe Tuesday, council member. I was in your office. I want to make sure, because I have several bill drafts, that I'm looking at the correct and most recent bill, because the one I pulled is dated, the draft date is 12/29/2022.
Yes,
Is that correct?
that is the correct one. That is, and as I mentioned in our meeting on Tuesday, there is another version that is near complete, but it's still being reviewed by our legal team. So that,
Okay.
yeah, that's what, when we
Okay.
spoke, and that's where the definition of transient is. So in the brief couple of minutes here, we've added this definition of what a transient is and taken that, put the exceptions up in there. We've included that some clarifying language around the fact that if you've already got a STVR registration or a non-conforming use permit, those just continue, although they will have to be annually renewed. You know, they're just going to be, you don't have to re-register if you've already got one. And then there's other language in here that we're looking at with in terms of grace periods. If you miss a deadline, giving an extra 90 days to get renewals in and things like that, because we recognize that this is going to be an unfamiliar process. Allowing people to change the number of bedrooms. So if you've got a family that has 2 kids and then those 2 kids go off to college and they now want to rent those bedrooms, they can just go in and do a change of information on the rental to do that. And there's some other things that we're looking at as far as allowing, you know, there's no language in here, for example, that if you're it's a hosted rental and it's your primary residence and you've got a family emergency, but you've got bookings already set up, you know, we want to allow for the owner to be able to go and deal with their emergency, but still maintain those bookings and things like that. So they'd be like temporarily unhosted. But, you know, we understand people have lives. Looking at potentially relating, rather than flat fees for things, relating that to the number of bedrooms or square footage being rented as TAR. And that is pretty much some of the main changes at this point that you'll be seeing in the next draft, which again, I hope to have out next week. No promises, but it depends on how busy the legislative research branch is and their availability to review it.
Thank you for the clarification.
Well, thank you very much all for coming today. And Heather, thank you very much for spending your time and going over this information. Couple quick questions. Can people still make comments on the hawaiicountytar.com website?
Of
Give
course,
feedback?
yes.
Okay. And then secondly, I did read that there's going to be some kind of press release regarding the January 20th, Friday at 5 p.m. I guess meeting. So that'll come out later.
Yeah. So there will be a press release about that, but if you go to that landing page, there is the link already on there to register for that webinar. So you can just share that with your members already if you'd like. Again, it'll be a more interactive presentation. We're hoping to do some polling around various questions so that we can get a pulse on the community feedback.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for spending the time with us today. And thank you all for coming and asking questions. If you have further comments or questions, I'm sure you can go to the hawaiicounty.tar.com and put them in there. And otherwise, you guys have a wonderful day. Happy New Year. Thanks, Heather.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Heather.
Out to my office as well, so happy to answer any questions.